Hello, friends. If you've come to this channel, it means that history fascinates you, just like it does me. Not the history from textbooks, but the one hidden in cold steel, in the scratches on a wooden stock, in forgotten blueprints. Today, we are embarking on a dangerous journey. We are going right into the heart of the inferno, to the industrial workshops of the 1930s, to the snow-covered fields of the Winter War, to the stuffy trenches of 1941. And at the center of this story will be not just a piece of iron, but a symbol of desperation, engineering genius, and cruel necessity. This is the story of the firstborn, the precursor, the submachine gun that paved the way for a legend but remained in its shadow. Are you ready to hear the truth about the PPD, the Degtyaryov submachine gun? Then don't switch away because there are unexpected twists ahead. And at the end, I will ask you a question that has divided many historians. And be sure to subscribe to the channel. We will have many more deep dives like this video if you enjoy detailed analysis, and write in the comments right away which submachine gun of the Great Patriotic War do you consider the main one, the PPSh or the PPD? Let's go. Can you imagine the Soviet Union in the late 1920s? A country barely recovered from the Civil War, living in a ring of hostile capitalist states. Industry is just getting on its feet, and the military is already looking to the future and seeing a dead end. The infantryman's main weapon is the Mosin rifle, magnificent, accurate, but slow. The world has already thundered through the First World War, where a new monster was born in the trenches, automatic close combat weapons. The Germans with their MP-18 showed that the density of fire in an attack or when defending a position sometimes means more than the accuracy of a shooter at 300 meters. So, in 1926, the Artillery Committee of the Red Army set a task to create our own Soviet automatic weapon for the junior and middle command staff. Think for a second about the scale. A country where tractors are a rarity takes on the most complex task of designing rapid-fire weapons. And the first stumbling block is the cartridge. What to shoot? Our own 3-line 7.62 by 54mm R is too powerful. The recoil would be uncontrollable in a light weapon. The cartridge from the Nagant revolver? Too weak. And then attention turns to the new pistol cartridge 7.62 by 25mm TT, created for the most modern domestic pistol of that time, the Tokarev from Tula. The solution is brilliant in its simplicity. Unification. One cartridge for the commander's pistol and for his automatic weapon. The bottle-shaped case is another gift from fate. It ensured reliable feeding, which was critically important for a voracious submachine gun. And here enters the stage Vasily Alexeyevich Degtyaryov, a living legend who came from simple gunsmiths, a student of Vladimir Fedorov himself, the father of the Russian automatic rifle. In 1929, he presents his prototype. It was not yet a masterpiece, but no longer a crude device. The design with a delayed blowback was complex, almost delicate. Imagine, to slow down the recoil of the bolt, red-hot after firing, a tricky system of friction between its handle and a bevel in the receiver was used. A weapon for engineers, not for millions of mobilized peasants. The tests in 1930 failed all prototypes, but were not a failure in principle. The army understood what it needed. It was a valuable lesson, and Degtyaryov makes a daring move. He abandons the complex scheme and in 1932 creates a model based on the principle of the simplest free blowback. Simpler than simple. A massive bolt, held back by a powerful spring. A shot, the powder gases push the bullet forward, and by the law of conservation of momentum, the case and bolt backward. The bolt, compressing the spring, ejects the case, reaches the rearmost point, and the spring forcefully returns it forward, chambering a new round. Brilliant simplicity. It is this scheme that will become the heart of almost all future Soviet submachine guns. But here, a small but proud country intervenes in history, Finland. Our military paid close attention to the Finnish Suomi KP-31. It was the Rolls-Royce among submachine guns, accurate, reliable, with an excellent 71-round magazine, but incredibly expensive to produce. The Finns even used a vacuum retarder for the bolt for reliability in the cold. Soviet designers looked at this and wisely said, "Too complicated." But they did take something. The layout, general ideas. And, most importantly, they saw that very drum magazine. In 1934 and 35, the PPD, after a series of modifications, was finally adopted for service. It seemed like a triumph, but no. Production was minuscule, almost piecemeal. The military top brass still looked skeptically at this police weapon, not believing in its importance for field warfare. The PPD became the weapon of elite units, border guards, and tank crews. And by 1939, its production was completely halted. It was considered expensive and unnecessary. This was a fatal mistake, the price of which would be measured in blood in just a few months. The winter of 1939 to 1940 arrives. The Soviet-Finnish Winter War. And here, the scenario that the Red Army Command considered impossible became reality. From the white snows, from the forests that knew every path perfectly, a hail of lead fell on Soviet columns. Not aimed from a distance, but incredibly dense. These were Finnish Schutzkorps and regular units with those same Suomis. In close combat conditions in the forest, in the conditions of a short winter day, the rifle lost. Something was needed that could unleash a large amount of lead in a short time. Panic and realization came simultaneously. The order was brief. Return the PPD to production. Immediately, and frantic, almost emergency work began. The weapon, which just yesterday was considered overly complex, had to be made quickly, in large quantities, and cheaply. The design was urgently simplified. They changed the shape of the ventilation holes on the receiver, those characteristic slots. Redesigned the safety, the ejector. But the main challenge was the magazine. The sector horn for 25 rounds was clearly too small. And then the engineers of the Kovrov plant performed a feat literally in a week. On their knees, they created an analog of the Finnish drum. Not a copy, but an analog, simplified, rougher, but their own. Capacity, 71 rounds. They often talk about 73. But the actual combat capacity was 71. Yes, it was heavy. Yes, it was difficult to load. A special clip was needed. Yes, it could rattle when moving. But it gave the soldier unprecedented power, the ability to fire continuously for almost a minute. This changed everything. Let's stop and look at this firstborn of the war. The PPD-40 is a weapon with a soul. A wooden stock that transitions into a long receiver, from which protrudes a characteristic long barrel jacket with slots. Externally strict, even ascetic. But inside, that same simple and effective mechanics. Free blowback. A firing pin rigidly fixed in its mass. The simplest safety in the form of a movable sleeve on the cocking handle, which could lock the bolt in the forward or rear position. The trigger mechanism allowed fire selection. Single shots for saving ammunition and accuracy, or automatic for that very hail. The sight, a flip sight for 100 and 200 meters, although the effective range in real combat rarely exceeded 200 to 300. It was a weapon for point-blank combat, for assault, for trench defense. And so it enters its first major war. The Finnish campaign showed both strengths and weaknesses. In skilled hands, in conditions of defense or a short counterattack, it was a formidable weapon. But the extreme cold of the Kola Peninsula revealed teething problems. Lubricant thickened, feeding problems could arise. The weapon required careful handling and maintenance. And a soldier in battle has no time for maintenance. It became clear. The PPD was an excellent first step, but for the coming total war, where millions of yesterday's students, workers, and peasants would sit in the trenches, something else was needed. More crude, more hardy, like a crowbar, and just as effective. And this crowbar was already knocking at the door. While the PPD fought on the Karelian Isthmus in Kovrov, at the same plant, another talented self-taught man, Georgy Semyonovich Shpagin, was already working on the answer. His task was to preserve the combat qualities of the PPD, but to make a weapon that could be stamped at any mechanical plant, even one without specialized gun-making equipment. And he did it. The PPSh-41 is a hymn to manufacturability. A minimum of milling, a maximum of stamping and welding. The legendary round barrel jacket with an angled muzzle compensator that reduced muzzle climb. The same drum magazine, for unification, the one from the PPD was used at first, later their own appeared. And most importantly, incredible technological simplicity. June 22, 1941. The Great Patriotic War began. And in the first, most terrible months of retreat and encirclements, the troops had everything. Rifles from Tsarist times, pre-war PPDs, and the first batches of PPSh. And here history makes an interesting zigzag. In besieged Leningrad under blockade conditions when everything was in short supply, they organized the production of precisely the PPD. Why? Because its design, although more complex than the PPSh, was still designed for more machine-based, precise processing. The city's factories still had the machines and specialists for this. The PPSh required the establishment of mass stamping, which was more difficult under siege conditions. So the PPD became the weapon of the defenders of Leningrad, a symbol of their perseverance and engineering ingenuity in the most inhuman conditions. But the truth of war is relentless. By 1942, it became completely clear: victory is forged not by a gun showroom, but by a conveyor belt. Hundreds of thousands of barrels were needed per month. And the PPSh perfectly fit this concept. It was made at factories in Moscow in Vatsky Polyeny in the rear. It was made from what was available. The PPD's swan song came in 1943, when its production finally ceased. But it did not disappear. It remained in service with rear units, with partisans. It can be seen in photographs even from 1944 and 45. So what do the PPD and the legendary PPSh have in common? And what is their main difference? What they have in common is their soul. A common concept, a powerful pistol cartridge, blowback operation, a focus on fire density in close combat, a common enemy and a common victory. But the difference is in fate. The PPD is a weapon of choice, a weapon for skilled troops, an engineering thought embodied in metal. The PPSh is a weapon of necessity, a weapon of the people's war, a technological breakthrough that allowed the Red Army to be armed with a fiery shield. The PPD is quality. The PPSh is quantity, which, as we know, has a quality of its own. The historical reference here is simple. Without the PPD, there would have been no PPSh. Degtyaryov created the school, proved the necessity, set the standard. Shpagin picked up the baton and derived the formula for victory in conditions of total war. The economic analysis is also obvious. In the pre-war years, the USSR could afford a small number of peace weapons for special units. The war dictated the law. Cost and speed of production are more important than individual characteristics. The PPSh cost almost 1.5 times less to produce than the PPD and was assembled many times faster. So that's the whole story. The story of a trailblazer who gave way to a more successful descendant, but without whom that success would have been impossible. The PPD is like the first satellite, imperfect, simple, but it paved the way to the stars. It opened the era of Soviet automatic weapons, an era whose culmination was the Kalashnikov assault rifle, which absorbed the lessons of both the PPD and the PPSh, and of that whole terrible and great war. And now, friends, the most important question I promised at the beginning. A question for true connoisseurs and lovers of weapons history. I have told you about the evolution, the economics, the combat use. And now I ask you, if you, an ordinary soldier of the Red Army, had to go on the attack near Kursk in 1943, what would you choose, the more accurate and temperamental PPD or the indestructible loud daddy PPSh? Justify your choice. Write in detail in the comments. Let's start a real historical discussion. Your opinion is priceless. And if this deep dive has hooked you, if you want us to continue unraveling such complex and interesting tangles of history together, be sure to support the channel. Subscribe, like this video story, so I know this kind of work is needed. Share this episode with like-minded friends. Ahead of us are many more topics, from forgotten experimental models to the analysis of great battles through the prism of weaponry. Stay on this wavelength, because as a wise man said, "Who controls the past controls the future." Let's control it together, objectively and with interest. Peaceful skies to all. And see you next time in our virtual historical workshop.